Good morning, world. Good morning, world. This is another edition of 13, and I see this as a bit of a departure for me and for 13, as I get into talking about some stuff that's a bit, I don't know, more esoteric and more difficult to talk about, perhaps. Certainly, I'm going to backtrack a little bit based on based on some of the things I've been thinking about for the last week or so. I think they're important. I really do. And that has to do with people's attention and people's focus. And it's one of those bits of the trance that I think needs to be broken off. You know, if you think of the trance like this huge chocolate bar, perhaps bits get broken off, and then we look at them and we figure out what they are, and maybe we digest them. Yeah, and hopefully what that means is that they don't come back to, or when they do come back to tempt us, we know what we're looking at, right? So the name of this 13 is called The Shadow. The Shadow, the Egregore, 9/11, and Consolation. It used to be that when we concerned ourselves with what we concerned ourselves with, and rightly so, was our own shadow. And that still exists, by the way, obviously. There is a shadow. Some say it enters us at the moment of birth. It's an entity that cannot leave this realm that is earthbound and that attaches itself to us as the moment we are born. Which is it's an interesting concept. You know, this is one of those things where, you know, one might be dealing with an earthbound entity who attaches itself to us. And I talk about this all the time, just in various ways, as we go through our material life, but cannot leave. As we leave, we move into a different dimension, a different realm, and this is an entity that is completely earthbound. And so there are mixed emotions is probably a tame way of putting it, but there's a lot of dramatic, emotional interplay going on between a human being who's a being of light and the cosmos and this earthbound entity that attaches itself to the human. One would think in the hopes of being able to go where the human goes someday. I mean, I do talk often about jealousy, about entities that wish they could do what human beings can do. Well, you know, I'm going back to some original work I've done because I think this is a big part of it. I don't want this to be left out. Anyway, the shadow does still exist, and the theory is that it attaches itself to us at the moment that we're born, and then it walks in lockstep with us our whole life. We don't see it generally, but we know it's there. We feel it. Sometimes it tries to show us who's boss, whether that's in our daily life or sometimes in our dreams. I've had one or two dreams like that. They were frightening. Right now, we're urgently concerned with the shadows outside us. Again, rightly so, of course. But this idea of studying and understanding our shadow side, this is something that concerned me deeply and completely just after 9/11. So all the way back into 2002 and onward. So I have, I'm going to roll out my 9/11 story now. In September 2001, my ex-husband Sean was working in Manhattan. He was working in Midtown, so not right on top of the action, but close enough. His building was next door to Port Authority bus station. So in the end, they were evacuated, and we lost touch with him for some time. It was forever. I think it was, oh my goodness, maybe 12 hours before he could find a way to get off that island. They'd been told to leave, and they had to get off. And there were a few trains running and some boats, and you could walk across the Brooklyn Bridge and things like that. Of course, him being a guy, he and some other guys decided that first they wanted to walk toward the event and see what was actually going on. So anyway, it's funny, though, that because the reason this springs to my mind today is that one of the things I've learned in the last year or so, I think, is that essentially people want to hear about the urgent bad stuff. This takes me back to 9/11, right? And that's fair enough, right? There's a lot of urgent bad stuff going on out there. I'm somebody who has access to some solutions, at least on the individual level, I think, and not wanting to be a hand-wringer, as I have always said to you. I will not be a hand-wringer. I try to make sure there's something to get hold of after I deliver all this bad news and we have a look at it. But what I've found is that, interestingly enough, unless the news is about 85% bad and 15% good, people don't want to listen. You lose their attention and they get bored. Think about that. How come? Well, it's not just adrenalized meat we've become addicted to, gang. It's adrenaline, period. We have to acknowledge that because it's a huge weapon of control. It's a huge weapon of control. I was going to write a chapter for the new book called Addicted Planet, but it's just such an interesting thing to think about. And anyway, let me get back to my what I was talking about. It is my business to break off bite-sized pieces of this trance and shine a light on them and talk about them. And I don't, as I just said, want to use the word addiction because people are immune to hearing that. The only words I can put together with the word addiction and pique people's interest is another word people are so immune to hearing. Money. I can say money is a gaming addiction and get all kinds of attention, although, you know, you really have to stop and wonder, what did she just say? Money is a gaming addiction. What does that mean? Anyway, that sentence requires thought, and the words are odd when you put them together, so it catches our attention, right? Anyway, back to my 9/11 story. I was not in New York City. I was in New Hampshire with my children, who were 5, 6, and 8 at the time. I was an intern, doing my interning in Waldorf teaching, from which, by the way, I'm about to retire. Sean, my then husband, spent a few weeks talking to his very frightened employees into coming back to work. They were scared to death. Then, since most of their clients had been in the World Trade Center, their business started to bleed to death. And he spent 18 months laying off staff. And then, in the end, he lost his job. Very common story back then. Maybe we've forgotten that at this point. Anyway, we moved to Kentucky, of all places, where I was hired by a Catholic school in a small town. A very small town called, well, I better not say. Anyway, the principal, bless her heart, was interested in bringing some of the Waldorf Steiner influence into the middle school, into social studies, what we call social studies in the United States. And I went from having 24 students to 168 students, which was quite the shock for me. Those teachers out there laughing at me right now, but it was at the moment. Anyway, at that time in Kentucky, it was still about 1974, and the parents had no tolerance for the kooky stuff I was bringing. And I think I'm lucky I escaped with my life, really. But what did happen was that, among other things at that time, I became highly interested in this concept of the egregore, and I started to write about it. How could you hear the word egregore, and not be pulled up short, right? Turns out the Steiner bunch, of who I'm, related in many, many ways, have done lots of work on this concept. And the actual definition is this. Ready? The egregore is an esoteric concept or an occult concept representing a thought form or a collective group mind, an autonomous psychic entity made up of and influencing the thoughts of a group of people. The symbiotic relationship between an egregore and its group has been compared to the more recent non-occult concept of the corporation and the meme. Oh, I'm back. I'm all over this again, you guys. I'm all over this again. Come on. I mean, the Steiner bunch looked at it because they had a suspicion that their governing body might be showing signs of this sort of thing, but all bodies of people create egregores. It's like walking around with your shadow side, right? It's inevitable. It's the polar way in which we live, okay? The shadow walk that walks in lockstep with us, whether it's an individual or a group, is there. And I had lots of lively discussions about this concept. It's extraordinarily relevant today, despite all the distractions, okay? I wrote a book about it. You're not shocked, I know. But I have been thinking about this poor book, Languishing Behind the Sun Thief. It's called Consolata's Companion, and it precedes the Sun Thief. It's every bit as good. In some ways, it's better. And this is the subject matter. This is the subject matter. I don't want it to get lost. I don't want it to get lost in the other stuff. As we know, extraordinary things can happen. For example, when the etheric body is abruptly torn free of the physical body. This is the space where visions happen and our clairvoyance really gets a foothold. Of course, the theory is that once the etheric is disengaged, we cannot survive. I think we can live for a very long time with a rearranged etheric relationship with our bodies, our physical bodies. Now, what if, for example, there was a catastrophic physical event that led us to being able to see our own double? How would we get accustomed to that and go on with our lives? What could we learn from that? Would this be a bad thing or would this be a good thing? Are our doubles there to help, to hinder, to help by hindering? These are important things to consider and quite interesting. Consolata took that trip. The book's called Consolata's Companion. And it was a hell of a trip. I would like to introduce this woman, this amazing woman, Consolata, to the world. She has been waiting very patiently while we try to catch our breath. Well, I try to catch my breath. Okay, I've got to go back for her and put her in the life raft, okay? That is it, then, this week for 13. Our adrenaline addiction post 9/11. Let's think about it. Let's talk about it. It keeps us from locking onto things that would help us regain our autonomy and our sovereignty. Think about it. And think about the collective group mind that could be used against us, and egregore as well. I believe the Freudo-Marxists who came to the USA after the Bolshevik disaster were interested in harnessing our collective consciousness. They believed that the American collective consciousness was sick and had to be healed, or at least controlled. I don't buy that any more than I buy any other folk soul has a sick collective unconscious. But every group has an egregore. So, see you after Amsterdam. That's this weekend, and I am so looking forward to meeting these people. Be prepared to sign up for the webinar version of my Sovereign Individual Workshop. I'm getting ready to roll that out. And let's get out from under the adrenaline and start gaining control of our own thoughts. Oh, of course. What would my show be if I didn't have problems stopping it, right? Bye for now.